who really holds the moral high ground in the Middle East conflict? It's a question that's been asked for decades, and the answers are anything but simple. If you think this is a clear-cut story of good versus evil, you're about to be challenged. Because the truth is uncomfortable. No side holds the moral high ground. Clinging to that illusion only deepens the conflict, the Middle East conflict. Especially between Israelis and Palestinians, is one of the most complex and emotionally charged issues in modern history. It has shaped global politics, caused untold suffering, and sparked passionate debates around the world. People naturally want to know who's right, who deserves sympathy, who's the victim, who's the aggressor. But what if this whole framework of right and wrong is misleading? Before we dive in, let's clarify why this matters. When people see the conflict as a simple battle of heroes and villains, it creates a dangerous narrative, one that fuels division, justifies violence, and blocks paths to peace. But if we accept the complexity that both sides have acted in morally questionable ways, both have legitimate fears, and both have suffered deeply, we open the door to understanding, empathy, and ultimately change. So let's explore, together, why neither Israelis nor Palestinians can claim the moral high ground, what that means for the conflict, and why it's crucial for us to rethink how we see this long-standing struggle. One of the biggest reasons this conflict feels so polarized is because humans naturally look for simple narratives. Good versus evil, victim versus oppressor. It's easier to emotionally process and rally around. A clear side. Media, politics, and history often reinforce these binary views through images of suffering, powerful slogans, and simplified stories. On one side, many view Israelis as defending their right to a safe homeland after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. On the other, Palestinians see themselves fighting for freedom, justice, and the right to return to lands they have lived on for generations. Both narratives carry deep emotional weight and historical trauma, but reality is rarely that straightforward. The roots of this conflict stretch back over a century, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, British colonial mandates, the creation of Israel in 1948, multiple wars, refugee crises, and decades of occupation. Each chapter is marked by tragedy, displacement, and human rights abuses committed by both sides. For Israelis, the founding of their state represented survival and hope after the horrors of the Holocaust. For Palestinians, it marked the Nakba, the catastrophe where hundreds of thousands were displaced, losing their homes and livelihoods. Since then, repeated wars, intifadas, settlement expansions, and security measures have created a cycle of fear and retaliation. This history shows how trauma and claims of justice from each side build on each other, making a clear moral judgment nearly impossible. One side is wholly right, and the other is wrong, fuels dehumanization. It blinds us to the complex realities on the ground. Families losing children, people living in fear, children growing up amidst violence. It also feeds propaganda, justifying acts of violence as self-defense or resistance without accountability. This mindset doesn't just stay in the region. It shapes international attitudes, foreign policies, public opinion worldwide, often deepening divisions instead of promoting peace. What we want to do today is go beyond headlines and slogans. We will examine actions and narratives critically, recognize where rights are violated on both sides, and acknowledge suffering without reducing people to stereotypes. This approach doesn't mean ignoring injustices. It means holding everyone accountable and demanding a higher standard of morality that recognizes humanity on all sides. By the end, I hope you'll understand why claiming the moral high ground in this conflict is not just inaccurate, it's harmful, and, more importantly, why seeing the conflict's complexity can open the way for dialogue and hope. We need to examine the actions, narratives, and consequences that shape this conflict. Let's break it down into three key areas. the impact on civilians, the role of historical grievances, the influence of political agendas. These aren't abstract concepts, they're real lives. It's real decisions and real pain that shape the ongoing conflict. Look at the human toll. The vast majority of casualties in this conflict are civilians, families, elders, caught between rockets and military responses. On both sides, homes are destroyed, communities shattered, and futures stolen. Consider Gaza, densely populated strip where over 2 million Palestinians live under blockade, with limited access to clean water, electricity, and medical care. Repeated military operations have killed thousands of civilians and injured many more. At the same time, Israeli civilians live under the constant threat of rocket attacks and tunnels used by militants, causing trauma and loss. Neither side is innocent here. When rockets are fired indiscriminately, they endanger innocent lives. When airstrikes hit residential areas, the death toll includes children, women, and non-combatants. Each act of violence begets fear, anger, and a desire for revenge, perpetuating a cycle with no clear moral victor. This human cost shows that violence and suffering are shared, not one-sided. Claiming moral superiority while ignoring the pain inflicted on the other side ignores reality and fuels further hatred. Historical trauma shapes how both Israelis and Palestinians see themselves as survivors, victims, and fighters for justice. For Israelis, the Holocaust remains the defining tragedy of the 20th century. 6 million Jews murdered in genocide, leading to an intense drive for a secure homeland where Jews would never again be vulnerable. The founding of Israel was a moment of hope, but also fear. Surrounded by hostile neighbors, Israel's security became paramount. For Palestinians, the Nakba, the catastrophe, marks their own collective trauma. Over 700,000 people displaced in 1948, losing homes and livelihoods. Many became refugees, barred from returning for generations. This sense of dispossession and injustice continues to fuel Palestinian identity and resistance. Both narratives are painful and deeply embedded in collective memory. This means that acts that one side sees as self-defense can be perceived by the other as aggression or ethnic cleansing. When historical grievances are seen through the lens of us versus them, they justify harsh actions or deny the rights of the other. Historical pain makes reconciliation difficult, and claiming the moral high ground even harder. Political agendas muddy the moral waters even more. Leadership on both sides often uses the conflict to consolidate power, divert attention from internal problems, or rally support through nationalist rhetoric. In Israel, government policies regarding settlements in the West Bank, military responses, and restrictions on movement have been criticized internationally as violations of human rights and international law. Yet these policies are defended by some Israeli leaders as necessary for security. On the Palestinian side, factions like Hamas use armed resistance and political messaging to assert authority and rally their base, but have also been accused of using violence against civilians and repressing dissent within Palestinian territories. These political realities show that moral claims are often entangled with strategic interests, not purely ethical concerns. When power and survival are on the line, actions can be justified in the name of the greater good, but often come at a tremendous human cost. Arguments we hear is, one side is just defending itself against aggression. And it's true. Every nation has the right to defend its citizens. Israel, surrounded by hostile neighbors and terrorist attacks, emphasizes its need for security. Palestinians argue their resistance is a fight against occupation and injustice. But here's where the claim to the moral high ground becomes complicated. Defense becomes problematic when it crosses into collective punishment, when entire populations face blockades, restrictions, or military reprisals that cause widespread suffering. For example, Israel's blockade of Gaza limits basic supplies, and military operations have devastated civilian infrastructure. Similarly, armed resistance that targets civilians or uses disproportionate force undermines claims of moral defense. The use of rocket attacks against Israeli civilian areas violates international laws. It's protecting non-Daesh combatants. So while defense is a right and actions harm innocent people en masse, the claim to moral superiority weakens significantly. Understanding that neither side holds the moral high ground isn't about moral relativism or giving up on justice. It's about rejecting simplistic narratives that fuel hatred and violence. About recognizing shared humanity and the complexity of history, politics, and human behavior. If we insist on moral absolutes, we risk turning the conflict into a zero-sum game, where only one side can win and the other must lose. This mindset stalls peace efforts and blinds people to opportunities for dialogue and compromise. By acknowledging that both sides have faults, fears, and legitimate grievances, we open space for empathy, a crucial ingredient for any lasting peace. If you've made it this far, you're probably asking, so, if no side holds the moral high ground, what does that mean? What's the point of this discussion? Insisting on clear-cut good guys and bad guys is one of the biggest obstacles to peace and healing in the Middle East. When we simplify complex, human struggles into black and white categories, we dehumanize the people on the other side. We turn them into villains or victims, never both, never human. This mindset fuels hatred, justifies violence, traps generations in a never-ending cycle of retaliation and suffering. Imagine growing up hearing only stories of your enemy's cruelty, taught to see them as monsters rather than people with hopes, fears, and dreams. For many Israelis and Palestinians, this is reality. Schools, media, even families often reinforce narratives that paint the other side as the ultimate threat. This education of fear and hatred creates walls, not just physical ones like checkpoints and barriers, but emotional walls in hearts and minds. When you see the other side as less than human, it becomes easier to justify harsh policies, violence, or ignoring their suffering. What happens if we don't challenge these narratives? If we continue clinging to the idea that one side is pure and the other evil, we risk normalizing endless conflict. Hatred will be passed down to future generations. Cycles of violence will continue without end. More families will lose loved ones. More children will grow up traumatized by war and hate. Political leaders will use this division to maintain power. Rather than work for peace, the international community will remain divided, sending aid and condemnation without addressing root causes. Put simply, if we don't rethink our assumptions, we stay stuck in a conflict that consumes lives and hopes. Embracing the truth that the conflict is complicated, that both sides have done harm and suffered, takes courage. It means rejecting easy answers and being uncomfortable. It means questioning our own biases and the stories we tell ourselves. But this is also where hope lies. When we acknowledge the humanity of the other side, when we see their pain as real, it opens the door to empathy. And empathy is the first step toward dialogue, reconciliation, and peace. With sensational headlines, it's tempting to pick a side and shout the loudest. But real understanding requires listening to the stories, fears, and hopes of all people involved. We may never agree on everything, but if we refuse to see the other side as human, we've already lost the chance to build a better future. This discussion isn't just about distant politics. It's about how we think, how we judge, and how we act, whether as individuals, communities, or nations. You don't have to pick sides to care about justice and peace. You can demand accountability, condemn violence, and still recognize the shared humanity on all sides. If you want to challenge the cycle of hate, it starts with questioning the narratives you've been told, seeking out stories from all perspectives, and holding space for complexity. What do we do with this complex, uncomfortable truth that no side in the Middle East conflict holds the moral high ground? First, we need to stop searching for simple answers or heroes and villains. That kind of thinking hasn't worked, and it never will. Instead, we must recognize that this conflict is a deeply human tragedy with no easy solutions. Both Israelis and Palestinians have legitimate rights and grievances. Both have experienced fear, loss, and injustice. Both deserve peace and security. But peace won't come from vilifying the other side or clinging to moral absolutes. When we acknowledge complexity, listen to each other's stories, commit to holding everyone accountable, not just one group. That's a hard path, but it's the only one that offers hope. Your perspective matters because narratives shape reality. If we only consume one-sided stories, we risk deepening division. But if you engage critically, question what you hear, and seek out diverse voices, you contribute to a broader, more honest conversation. Understanding that no side has the moral high ground doesn't mean giving up on justice. It means demanding it fairly for all. To the audience, so here's my question for you. Do you think acknowledging moral complexity helps or hurts the search for peace? Why? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a real conversation going. Join the debate, challenge your assumptions, and be part of something bigger than just picking sides. If you found this video eye-opening, hit subscribe. For more debatable statements that challenge what you think, we explore tough questions to help you sharpen your critical thinking and understand the world better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the comments.